What can you actually build starting from the Mosaic blank theme? In this video, we're taking its clean wireframe style foundation and transforming it into a fully custom WordPress website. We'll build the homepage, about page, contact page, blog archive, and post template step by step, while also setting up reusable styles, components, and layouts that make the whole website feel consistent from the start. Let's get into it. If you've just installed Mosaic, you're probably already here. If not, you can head over to the Themes menu and then add a new one. I'll go with the blank theme. Then, for the page kit, I'll select Core. We're going to customize the templates anyway, so this is just a starting point. Let's run the wizard and wait a little until it imports the resources for us. All right, we're in. Everything is fine here, so let's hit Next and set up our structure. Now this is where things get a bit more interesting. Here we can set up our templates. For the header, I'll switch to Header 5. And for the footer, to Footer 3. These are pretty close to the design I want. Next, for the homepage, I'll choose Homepage 9. It's a newer one, so a pretty solid base. Awesome, now which one is the best for the blog archive? Let's go with Blog 5. Next, the post template. It looks good for now. Same for the 404 template. So I'll keep those. Then for the About page, let's switch it to About 8. And honestly, I don't need the Features page, so I'll just delete that template real quick. Lastly, the contact can stay as it is for now. And that's it. Let's finish the wizard. Just like that, we land on the Mosaic's templates page, fully ready to start building. Let's jump into the homepage template. But before we start designing anything, let's take a quick detour that'll save us a lot of time later, setting up our style variables. Click the cog icon in the top right and open the style variables. Style variables are like design tokens. Instead of choosing colors and fonts manually on every element, we define them once and reuse them across the site. Later, changing the variable updates every element using it. First, I'll keep the primary background as white. Then, let's add a new color to the background group. I'll call it something like secondary and drop in the value. Nice. I'll move it just below primary to keep things organized. Now let's update the accent color. I'll switch it to a grass green. And you can already see what happens. Everything using that variable updates instantly. That's exactly why we're doing this first. Let's go ahead and add a few more colors. First, a new one to the background group. Name it Accent 2 and add the value. I'll move it just below the other accent variable, just to keep it tidy. Next, let's just change the text accent color. We don't have to make a new one here. Okay, time to actually add one to this group too. Like for the background, I want an accent 2 here for the text as well. And drag it into place as before. The last one for the text is changing the aHover variable. Awesome, the last color variable here is the secondary border color. All right, the color system is in place. Now let's set up our fonts. Head over to the font family collection and add a new variable called heading. For the family, I'll choose Poppins and then remove the weights we don't actually need. You can expand this further if you want, but for me, this is definitely enough for now. Let's just quickly save our changes before we move on. All right, now the fun begins. First, let's prep the layout a bit. I'll duplicate the title and add another button. Wrap them in columns. Then center them. Next, I'll add a star rating component just below the images. And since we don't need these images right now, I'll remove them to keep things clean. Finally, let's switch the rows element to columns. Then center this one too. Alright, structure looks good. Let's first quickly update the content. I'll just replace the title, subtitle, and description with something that fits the design a bit more. Now let's style the subtitle. I'll switch its class to Heading 4. For the title, select the Heading 1 element class and apply the heading font variable. Yeah, this already looks better. Now let's take it a step further. I'll create a custom size. To do that, head to the custom class and add a new value under size. I'll call it 10XL and drop in a clamp value. Now let's turn this into something reusable. Click the arrow next to the custom class and create a class for the Heading 1 slot. Name it L. And just like that, you've created an element subclass. Super simple and super useful. The element class controls the default style, and subclasses create reusable variations. So here, we've created a larger version of Heading 1 that we can reuse later, instead of manually styling this one heading again. Now back to the subtitle. Select the element class and apply the heading font variable here as well. Instantly looks much more consistent. Okay, next let's style the buttons. First, I want both of them to have fully rounded corners, so I'll select the button element class and set the border radius to full. Now let's set up a proper structure. I'll create an element subclass called Primary. I'm not styling it yet, this is just for hierarchy. For the second button, I'll change the background color to Accent 2 and create another subclass called Secondary. Let's work a bit on their sizing. On the Primary button, I'll adjust the padding. For the left side, I'll pick L and apply it to the right side too. For the top, select S and apply to the bottom as well, and create a new subclass called L. Now let's do the same for the secondary button to keep things consistent. First, the padding, same as before, so won't bore you with the details. The subclass is also the same, just on secondary this time. Great, but we definitely need a bit more personality here, so let's drop in an icon on the primary button from the Add panel. Double-click to open the icon library, and I'll go with an upward arrow. Resize it slightly. I'll go with 16 pixels. Then create a small element subclass called S. Now let's replace the primary button text. Same for the secondary. And we're almost there. As a final touch, I'll adjust the font weight on the button element class, just to give it a bit more presence. There you go. Now let's add a video background. If you check the section's image and background settings, you'll notice there's no built-in option for video. So, how do we do it? It's actually simpler than it looks. First, add a video element to the section and place it just above the container. Set its position to absolute and stretch it to all sides. And make sure it fills the section. But it's covering everything. But this has a pretty easy fix. Just set the video z-index to -1. And now, it disappears completely. No worries though, that just means we need to bring the section forward. So set the hero section z-index to 1. There we go. Now let's actually get something playing in the background. I've already uploaded a video, so I'll just select it here. Next, I'll turn on autoplay, mute it, and enable looping, so it plays continuously without interruption. And since we're using it as a background, I'll disable the controls too. Let's preview this real quick. Nice, it already adds a lot. Let's head back. And in the Style tab, you might notice something a bit annoying. If you click on the section background, you're actually selecting the video instead. If that starts to get in your way, here's a small trick. Open the More options and add a style declaration of pointer events, none. Now, when you click the section, you'll select the section, not the video. I know it's not essential, but definitely a nice thing to know. All right, let's take this a step further and add an overlay. I'll drop in a div just like we did with the video and stretch it to cover the entire section, position to absolute, and the rest. As soon as I add a background, you'll see it completely hides everything. So let's fix that. I'll adjust the z-index so it sits where we want it. Much better. I'll also apply the same pointer events none trick here. Again, optional, but it keeps things easier to work with. Now, instead of a solid background color, let's use a gradient to reveal the video. For the first color, I'll pick our secondary. And for the second one, I'll fade it out to transparent. And just like that, the video comes through nicely, but with a bit more control and readability on top. Now let's make this a bit more powerful. I'll head over to Style Variables Color Collection. First, I'll click Edit Collection and rename the default mode to Light. Then add a new mode and we'll call it Dark. Close the collection editor and switch from light to dark. Right now, nothing really changes. That's because both modes still use the same values. So let's fix that. I'll go in and adjust the colors for dark mode. I'll skip ahead, but on the screen, you can see the colors I've got, so feel free to copy those, or use your own colors. All right, back to the canvas. Select the Hero section and scroll down in the Style tab, and you'll see a new option, Variable Modes. Now, if I switch this section to dark, you'll see all those variables update instantly. Same layout, completely different look. That's pretty cool. Let's make one more change here. I'll adjust the description. On its custom class, I'll change its color, so it reads better in dark mode. And there we go. Now you can switch between light and dark mode without rebuilding anything. All right, let's fix these star ratings. Normally, you'd style each instance of a component separately. But since I want all stars across the site to stay consistent, I'll edit the component itself. Select the first icon, and you'll notice something pretty interesting. Its color is coming directly from the SVG code. To take control of it, I'll press the T button. This automatically converts the color to current color. Let's quickly do the same for the rest of the icons. Now, if you wanted to style each icon individually, you could assign a color right here. Or go to the Style panel and set it under Typography. But there's a better way. Instead of styling each icon separately, I'll select the parent container, in this case, the columns, and apply the color there. And just like that, all icons update at once. Much easier. But let's make it even better. I'll create a color variable for these stars, so I can reuse it anywhere. And since Mosaic allows variables to be used as the values of other variables, this becomes really flexible later on. All right, exit the component. Now I'll quickly adjust the spacing between these two buttons. I'll just use the toolbar and pick a utility class. Nice and quick. Okay, almost done with the hero. I think I want it to feel a bit taller, so I'll set a min height of 80 VH. And I'll push the content down by setting the content X at the top here to end. Now I can remove that extra padding because we don't really need it anymore. Let's preview it. Yeah, that looks solid. And just like that, we're done with the hero section for now. All right, let's head back. Hit Update and let's move on to the About section. First thing, we need to change this title. Now, while we're here, there's a little plot twist. If you look at the class, it says H2, not heading 2. And here's the weird part. Even if I switch this to heading 1, it still shows as H2. So what's going on? This is where the HTML tag comes in. Basically, the tag decides the structure of your page, while the class decides how it looks. And that structure actually matters for accessibility. Now, if I reset the tag name, you'll see the element class change back to heading 1. so you can mix these however you want. But for now, I'll set it back to H2 and keep things semantically correct. Alright, next let's swap out these two images. Just select two from the media library. Now I want both of them to have slightly rounded corners. So instead of styling them one by one, I'll select the image element class. And here's something neat. As I hover over the variables, you can actually preview the change live. Both images update at the same time. I'll go with the M variable, which gives us a nice 16-pixel radius. Let's update this section a bit. I'll change the description, and then add a link element right below it. Now let's style the link. I'll select the link element class. Set the font family to base. Bump the weight up to semi-bold, and remove the underline for now. Next, I'll switch over to the hover when link state. And here, I want to bring the underline back. And nothing happens, which is a bit suspicious. The reason is pretty simple. We're styling the hover state of a link, but this isn't actually a link yet. So let's fix that. I'll quickly add a link, just using a hashtag for now. And there it is. Now, when I hover, the underline shows up, and the color changes. So, yeah, small detail, but easy to miss. Let's make this link a bit more interesting. I'll add an icon next to it, just to give it a bit more visual weight. Now I'll switch the icon to icon box and resize it using the width and height controls. Since the icon is getting smaller, I'll also tighten up the padding. I'll go with a 3XS on all sides. Now, instead of repeating this setup every time, let's make it reusable. I'll create an element subclass, just like before. And finally, I'll double-click the icon, pick an upward arrow, and update the link text. Much better. Now, let's bring this link to life a bit. Select the icon. Then, I'll switch to the hover on link state. At the bottom, open the More options and add a new transition. I'll choose Rotate Z and set it to 45 degrees. So now, when we hover, the arrow rotates clockwise. Nice, but a bit too snappy. Let's smooth it out. Back in the normal state, I'll add a transition again. For the property, enter Transform, and for the duration, 300 milliseconds. And now when we hover, it's much smoother and way more satisfying. Next, I'll scale these numbers up by switching from heading 4 to heading 3 element class. Do that for all the headings here. You might notice the label still says div. That's coming from the HTML tag, just like we saw earlier. Now I'll adjust the supporting text element class for all the texts here. Then, on the Style tab, on the Heading 6 element class, apply the font variable. Next, on the Custom class, tweak the color a little. Same for all the other texts here. And to give everything a bit more space, I'll increase the row gap on the section. Now the content can breathe. Let's preview it real quick. Yeah, everything looks good. Head back to the editor, save the template, and we are ready to move on. All right, now we've arrived at the services section. This one's going to be fun. First things first, I'll change the section background to our secondary color. Now let's clean things up a bit. I'll remove the unnecessary elements from this first container, replace the title, and update the element class. Next, I'll delete all the service cards, but I'll keep one. We don't need to build everything at once. Just design one properly and reuse it. Let's update this card. I'll replace the title, adjust the element class, and remove the description, because we won't need it here. Now I'll pull the heading out of the rows element since this structure doesn't really serve us anymore. Then delete the rows. Same with the image. I'll remove it to keep things a bit cleaner. Instead, I'll add an icon after the text. Then switch the element class to icon box. Now I'll move it above the text and align it to the right. And finally, from the icon library, our good old upward arrow returns. Now let's style the service card a bit. First, remove the border and add a border radius. Size M is pretty good here. Next, let's give it some breathing room. To do that, I'll increase the padding and set it to XL on all sides. Now I want this card to stay perfectly square, so I'll set an aspect ratio of 1:1. This way, no matter the screen size, it keeps its proportions. And finally, let's fix the layout inside. Head back to the Flex settings and set Content X to space between. Now the elements inside the card automatically push away from each other. Okay, let's make it a bit more eye-catching. First, I'll add a background image from the media library. And just like in the hero, I'll layer a gradient on top as well. For the first color, I'll grab secondary. For the second, just like on the hero, transparent. Great. And now watch this. Switch the mode. And yep, there it is. That mode change magic again. Honestly, never gets old. All right, let's make this more interactive. I'll wrap the whole box in a link. And then, just add a hashtag. The text turning green and underlined on hover? Not exactly what I was going for. Let's fix it. Head over to States, then hover on link. First, let's set the color to accent and remove that underline from it. Better, but not quite there yet. The text is still picking up that green color. So I'll select the title, stay in the hover on link state, and remove that color. Instead, I'll set it to inherit. This way, it just follows whatever color the parent element has. Much cleaner. Next, I'll switch this icon's mode. Back to light. Okay, we are getting there, but the text is still a bit hard to read. Nothing an overlay couldn't fix. So let's add a div inside the box. And just to visualize it, I'll give it a background color. Now I'll stretch it across the whole box, with the same trick as before in the hero. Set the position to absolute, and use full width and full height. Uh-oh, it's not behaving. That's because it's positioned relative to the section. So let's fix that quickly. Select the box, then set its position to relative. There we go. I'll also set overflow to hidden, so the border radius applies properly to the div. Now on this div here, let's tweak the Z index a bit. And do the same on this rows here as well. And we are back in control. Looks good on hover, but now the green div is blocking the background image by default. Easy fix. Select the div, then at the bottom, I'll set the usual pointer events none, and bring the opacity down to 0%. All right, interaction time. First, I'll select the link. This is going to be our trigger, which is basically the thing that listens for the hover. Now head over to the Interactions tab and add a new hover interaction. Next, I'll select the div, because that's what we actually want to animate. Let's add an opacity action. Now, quick reminder, this div is currently set to 0% opacity in the Style tab, so it's basically invisible right now, which means on hover, we want it to show up. I'll set the opacity to 100%. Okay, now let's preview it. Nice, but a bit slow. I'll tighten up the duration on the timeline. Much better. Now let's add a little extra something. I'll grab the icon and add a rotate Z action. On hover, I'll rotate it 45 degrees clockwise. And I'll match the duration, so everything feels in sync. All right, let's check it. Nice, that feels way more interactive. But there's one more problem. It doesn't reset when I hover out. Easy fix though. Switch to the Hover Out tab. Now, instead of rebuilding everything from scratch, I'll just hit Duplicate Actions on the timeline. That copies everything from Hover In. Huge time saver. Now I'll just change the values. For the div, set it back to 0% opacity. And for the icon, back to 0 degrees. Okay, let's preview again. Hover in. Hover out. Perfect, exactly what I wanted. All right, that was the hard part. Now let's make this thing reusable, because rebuilding this every time would be painful. First, make sure you've selected the link element. That's important. Then we'll turn this into a component. I'll call it Services Box and save it as a part in the Miss category. And just like that, this whole thing becomes an instance. Now the fun part, let's duplicate it. We've got a second service box already, and like this, you can edit an instance. Now, select the rows, and then we can replace the background image with a different one from the media library. And update the title. And there we go. Now we have the same structure and interactions with completely different content. If you want to jump back out, you can use the breadcrumb menu at the top, or just hit Leave. Awesome, now let's build this section out a bit. I'll duplicate this box and then again a few times, let's say 3 more, and update the content in each one. To save a bit of time, I'll just skip and show you the end result here. Now, quick tip, this is where components really shine. If these were just regular duplicates, you'd have to update each one manually. Not fun. But since this is a component, you only need to change the main one once, and every instance updates instantly. You'll definitely appreciate that in the future. All right, I'll undo this for now, just to keep things clean. And we are done here, so let's save the page real quick. All right, next up, the Features section. First, let's fix the container layout a bit. I'll open the Toolbar class selector and switch the container to a 2-column layout with equal width. Much better. Now we've actually got some room to work with. Next, let's update the content. Rewrite the title, change the element class, remove the description. You know the drill by now. Let's clean up this grid layout too. First, I'll switch this grid over to rows. Yeah, already feels a lot more relaxed. Now watch this. Instead of rebuilding the whole thing manually, I can completely redesign this element with a single element class change. Love that. I'll switch this icon to icon box to match our previous designs and reset the custom class styles. Now let's pick a better icon. Open the icon library, search for check, and there it is. Classic, reliable, very checkboxy. Next, let's update the title. I'll change the class. And don't forget to apply the heading font variable to the font family. That keeps everything visually consistent across the website. Now update the description too. Awesome. Now let's give the elements here a bit more breathing room. Using the toolbar, I'll apply a new utility class for some column gap. At this point, we've got 2 options. We could turn it into a component, or just duplicate it. And honestly, for this one, duplication is perfectly fine, so I'll just duplicate it a few times. Then I'll remove the extra elements we don't need, and quickly update the duplicated content. Titles, descriptions, you know the drill. One last change here. I want a bit more breathing room between them overall, so I'll increase the gap here too. Wow, okay. This section came together surprisingly fast. All right, this next one is going to be our project section. First, I'll switch the section background to secondary, just to separate it a bit from the previous one. Now, let's clean it up. I'll remove all the unnecessary text and replace the tile with something more fitting. Next, I want the layout to feel more consistent with the previous sections. So I'll update the container layout to match the same structure we've already been using. For the article container, I'll switch it to a 7+5 2-column layout. That gives the left side a little more room, which works great for the visual side. I'll also remove this max width utility class from the image and replace the image with one I uploaded earlier. Already feels more custom. Now, instead of rebuilding everything from scratch, let's work smarter. I'll open the library and insert the component we created earlier and drag into position real quick. And since we don't need this old rose anymore, bye. Then I'll quickly detach the instance. The interaction on the link can stay though. That hover effect still works nicely. But I will remove the background image and overlay. Okay, back to light mode here. And now we can do the same on the icon too. Much better. Now let's update the title text. Then I'll wrap this in a rose element and duplicate the heading text. Change its element class to paragraph and update the text. I'll tighten the spacing a little, just so the content feels a bit more connected. Let's preview this real quick. Nice. And because we kept the interaction on the link, the hover effect still works exactly like before. All right, let's build out the rest of the section. First, duplicate this container and move the link box to the first position. But now we've got a small problem. The link box suddenly became way bigger than before. No worries though, this has an easy fix. Right now the layout is using a 7+5 column split, so I'll flip it to 5+7 instead. And just like that, the proportions feel balanced again. I'll duplicate the first container one more time and swap the order around. Now let's speed things up a bit, because it's just a matter of replacing the text and images and cleaning up any leftovers from the original content. Let's check it out. Nice. Everything feels consistent, but still varied enough to stay interesting. And before future us gets angry, let's save. All right, our next section will be a testimonial one. Honestly, at this point, you're basically speed running the build. I'll remove the usual placeholder content, switch up the container's layout, update the heading as we did in the previous sections, and change the icons to icon box, and quickly reset the custom style overrides. Now let's replace this text, update the image with the clients, and swap out their title inside the instance. To save a bit of time, I'll duplicate the first one here 2 times, and then update the content for those 2. Nothing new here. And just like that, the whole testimonial section comes together. Save, and let's move on to the last section, the CTA. Okay, so let's start by switching our background color to secondary. Instant mood change. Now let's update the title. I'll replace the text, then tweak the size using the class selector. And while we're here, I'll select the heading 2 element class and apply our heading font variable. Yeah, much more consistent. Next up, the description. Let's swap that out too. Now for the button, I'll rewrite the text. Add an icon element from the Add panel. Reduce its size. Select an icon from the library. Just the usual, make it look clickable routine. And lastly, let's replace the images on both sides. Nice. Now for the finishing touch, I'll switch this section to dark mode. And honestly, it already looks pretty solid. One thing I noticed while building this though, the sections could use a bit more breathing room. Right now, everything feels just a tiny bit too cozy. So I'll select the section element class, increase the top padding to 3XL, and the same goes for the bottom. And while I'm here, I'll replace these hard-coded left and right values with style variables too. Future us will appreciate that. And just like that, the homepage is finished. Not bad at all. All right, let's see what we've got so far. On desktop, everything looks pretty solid. Nice spacing, good hierarchy. Nothing's fighting for survival yet. But what about other breakpoints? We should probably check those too. You can switch between different breakpoints in the preview here using the top bar. Let's switch over to tablet. And already you can see things getting a little tighter. The content still works, but the spacing and proportions could definitely use some love. Now let's check mobile. And yep, things are getting a little cozy here. Nothing major though, we've got a solid base to work from. Let's head back to the editor and see what we can do about this. You can find and manage the available breakpoints here. I'll start with the tablet breakpoint. And let's resize the canvas a bit, just to get closer to what an actual tablet would feel like. Hero looks good. About section, also looking solid. And, oh, yep, there it is. These service boxes have a tiny little issue. Right now, the link element is hugging its content, which means the card is trying to shrink down as much as possible. Not exactly the look we're going for. Luckily, this is an easy fix. And the best part? We only need to fix it once inside the component. Now, let's switch back to the desktop, or rather, the base breakpoint first, so the change applies consistently across all views. Since it is the highest in the hierarchy, the rest will inherit the changes unless those override it specifically. Now, with the link selected, simply set both the width and height to 100%. Then I'll do the same for the service card itself. And just like that, it stretches properly. All right, let's keep going. Now these project cards are looking very tall. And the reason is the aspect ratio. Earlier, we set it to 1:1, which makes the cards perfectly square. Great for desktop, a little dramatic for tablet. We've got a few options here. We could set it to auto, which would let the height follow the content naturally. Or we can go with something like 2:1, which is still structured, just a bit higher and cleaner. Let's quickly repeat that for the other cards too. One more thing here. The order feels a bit off in this layout. Now, technically, we could drag the cards around, but that would also affect desktop, and our future selves would be very disappointed. Instead, I'll select the content card, which is the link here, then go to the layout order setting and set it to 1. There we go, now tablet gets the layout it needs, and desktop doesn't get dragged into the drama. The rest of the page actually looks pretty solid on tablet already. So, let's see how badly we broke mobile. First, let's scroll up real quick and shrink the canvas height a bit too, just so we're not scrolling for the next 5 minutes. All right, first mobile problem. The hero text is getting a little too friendly with the background video. That's not exactly readable. Easy fix though. I'll just adjust the video overlay gradient and pull the darker part up a bit. And just like that, the text is way more contrast. Much better. Next up, these ratings. They're a bit cramped horizontally on mobile, so I'll simply switch the flex direction. Same thing for the buttons container. A quick direction change. And now everything stacks nicely. Now on to the service cards. The padding feels a little oversized for mobile. Luckily, these are components, so one change fixes all of them. On the rows, I'll swap the padding from XL down to M on all sides. Much cleaner. All right, let's keep moving. And here we are again, our project cards are back. First, I'll update the padding to match the service cards from earlier. Keeps everything feeling consistent. Now, because we previously set the aspect ratio to 2:1, the layout looks a little confused again. This time, I'll just set the aspect ratio to auto. Much better. Also, tiny confession. I probably should have turned this into a component earlier, but we're embracing chaos today. Okay, now I'll repeat these same changes for the other cards as well. Nothing new here, just keeping things consistent across the page. And honestly, The rest of the homepage already looks pretty solid. Now let's switch back to the desktop, or rather the base breakpoint first, so the change applies consistently across all views. Since it is the highest in the hierarchy, the rest will inherit the changes unless those override it specifically. All right, time to select the master. Actually, this part is pretty nice. You don't need to open a new window, reload the website, or jump through 5 different menus just to edit your layout. All you need to do is click on the master inside the template and then enter it like this. So what exactly is the master? Think of it as the reusable parent layout for your website. It provides the shared structure used across multiple pages. Or, in less fancy words, this is basically where your header and footer live. Now let's jump into the nav bar and swap out the logo. You'll notice the logo is a component, which makes sense. The logo appears all across the website, so we want to manage it from one place. I'll edit the component, and inside you'll see an SVG icon being used as the current logo. But my actual logo is a PNG for now, so I'll just drop in an image element instead. Then I'll select my logo from the media library. And with that in place, I can remove the old icon element. Now the logo updates everywhere automatically. For example, if we scroll down, the logo here in the footer. Now head back up and let's clean up the menu. I don't need the features item here, so I'll remove that one. Then I'll quickly reorder the support link. And while we're here, let's check the home link real quick. You'll notice the URL isn't hard-coded. It's actually coming from dynamic data, which is super useful because if the homepage URL ever changes later, the navigation updates automatically. No manual fixing, no broken links. We love that. Now let's update the second menu item. I'll link it to the About page. And just like before, this is also a dynamic link. I'll rename the text to About. Same thing for the blog item. Set it to the blog page. And since the label already says blog, we can leave the text as it is. Now for the button. I'll link this one to the contact page and change the text to request a quote. And of course, we can't leave the button iconless. So, let's grab one from the Mosaic icon library real quick and reduce its size a little. Awesome. Now let's quickly update the menu styling too. I'll select the menu link element and make sure I'm editing the element class, not just a single item. Right now, the underline is always visible. That feels a little too eager. So I'll remove it on the normal state, but bring it back on hover when link. Let's give it a quick preview. Now the underline only appears when you interact with the link, which feels way more intentional. Let's check the tablet view real quick. And yeah, that still looks solid. The menu fits nicely even at this breakpoint, so no extra adjustments needed. And mobile actually looks pretty good too. But this close icon? Not so much. Let's make it nicer. I'll switch it to an icon box first, just to make it look a little better. Now change to navbar opened. For the icon color, I'll use accent hover. And for the background, let's also go with accent hover. But don't forget, there's another icon hiding in the navbar. So let's select the navbar, close the drop-down, and there it is. This one only needs a quick update. I'll just switch it to icon box as well, and now both states match nicely. Awesome, let's give it a quick save before we move on. Now, I'll check what we have so far. Desktop, including laptop here, looks good. Tablet's good too. And on mobile, the drop-down menu works exactly as expected. Always a good sign. Now, if you want to make the mobile menu feel a bit fancier, you can change the open animation right here. Maybe a fade or a flip. Give it a little personality. There's also an option to lock page scrolling while the mobile menu is open, which is super helpful if you don't want users accidentally scrolling the page behind it. But honestly, the default setup already feels pretty solid. so I'll leave it as it is for now. Alright, let's finish things up with the footer. First things first, I'll tighten up the spacing a bit. The top and bottom padding feel a little too roomy right now, so I'll switch both of them to size S. Next, let's fix the colors. I'll set the background to primary, and then switch the section over to dark mode. Much better. Now let's quickly check the responsive views. Tablet first. Looks pretty good, but I'll reduce the top and bottom padding here too, just to keep things a bit more compact. And mobile? Honestly, no complaints. Let's save our changes real quick. And just like that, we finished both the homepage and the master template. Time to head back to the templates page. Alright, let's style the blog archive next. We'll start with the header. I'll switch the background over to our secondary color. Yeah, it already feels much more on brand. Now let's update the title. And while I'm here, I'll change the element class to heading 1L, so it has a bit more presence. Now let's replace the description text too, because this generic one isn't exactly peak content strategy. Next, I'll jump into the loop and enter its scope. And here you can see the structure of a single article card. This is basically the layout that gets repeated for every post in the loop. You'll also notice that most of these elements already have dynamic data connected. Now, if you want to change any of this, or you build your own structure with new elements, just select them on the canvas, hit the Dynamic Data button, and choose what content you want to display. And here's the nice part. If I edit the first item, every other item updates too. Pretty satisfying if you ask me. I don't really need the post category here, so I'll remove that to keep the layout cleaner. And already this section feels much more focused. Now, if you want to make the entire card clickable, here's a little trick. Right now, only the title sits inside the link element, but if I move everything else into that same link, the whole card becomes clickable. Super handy for blog layouts and cards like these. Personally, though, I think the title link is enough here, so I'll keep it simple. If you want to give these items a bit more breathing room, then, as you would expect, you can just add spacing to the item, and it will be applied to all items inside the loop. I'm fine with the default, though, so I'll keep it as is. And if you want to switch the layout from one column to 2, 3, or 4, the easiest way is just changing the utility class on the items element. One click, completely different layout. At the bottom of the articles, we've got the pagination. And yep, just like pretty much everything in Mosaic, this is fully customizable too. Let's give these buttons a bit of love. I'll select the pagination button element class, change the font weight to semi-bold, and switch the background to accent 2. Now let's round things out a bit. Set the border radius to full. Yeah, much friendlier already. And notice something nice here. As I style the previous button, the next button updates too. That's the element class doing its thing. Now I'll add a bit more horizontal padding and replace the hard-coded top and bottom spacing while I'm here. I'll also bump the font size slightly and remove the underline from the normal state. Okay, that's looking pretty clean, but the hover state? Yeah, that color feels a little off. Let's fix that. Change the state to hover. Then I'll update the text color to accent hover. Same goes for the background color too. There we go, much better. And now for the fun little page numbers. I'll select one of the numbers and switch to the number element class. Now up here in the state selector, I'll change it from the default state to active. This lets us style the currently active numbers separately. Pretty handy. Next, I'll change the text color to our accent style variable. And again, same for the background. And already it looks much better. Now let's make it feel a bit softer. I'll set the border radius to full. And there we go. Next, we'll style the hover state. I'll switch from normal to hover. and start changing the styles. First, the text color. I'll change that to accent hover. Then the background too, also accent hover. And yeah, now it's starting to feel like a proper button. Let's round it out a bit more. I'll set the border radius to full. Much nicer. Now back to the normal state. I don't really want the underline here, so let's remove that. And while we're at it, I'll bump the font weight slightly too. Yeah, I kind of like that. One more really useful thing here. Mosaic also lets you design the no result state. So instead of showing a sad little empty page, you can actually customize the experience. For now, I'll just rewrite the text. But just like everywhere else in Mosaic, you're not limited to text changes only. You can drop in layouts, buttons, images, pretty much whatever you want. So even your nothing here state can still look intentional. All right, slight problem. Right now I've got 10 blog posts showing here, but honestly that's a bit much. I only want 6. Luckily, this is super easy to fix. First, I'll save the page. Then head back to the WordPress dashboard. Go to Settings, then Reading. And right here, we've got the setting, Blog Pages Show at Most. It's currently set to 10. I'll change that to 6 and save the changes. Now let's jump back to the blog archive template. Let's scroll and see how many we actually see now. And there we go. Only 6 posts are displayed at a time now. So much better. One last thing this page needs, the CTA block from the home page. And honestly, instead of rebuilding it from scratch, let's work smarter for a second. I'll jump back to the homepage template, scroll all the way down, and turn the CTA section into a component. Let's call it CTA block, and save it in the CTA category. This keeps everything nice and organized for later. And before we do literally anything else, save the home page. This is not the moment to live dangerously. Now let's head back to the blog archive. I'll scroll all the way down and drop in our CTA block. Oops, wrong one. If you ever grab the wrong element like I just did, you can quickly switch from the Library tab to the Component Library right here. And there it is. Much better. I'll save the changes, and with that, this page is done. Back to templates we go. We've got the blog archive done. Now let's move on to the blog post template. And honestly, I'm not really feeling the template I picked earlier during the wizard. So let's swap it out. Open the library. And from page, then post. Load post 07 instead. Much better starting point. Now I'll clean things up a bit by removing the old sections sitting at the bottom of the template. There's no need to keep extra baggage around. For the first section, I'll switch the background color to secondary. And yeah, that already feels more on brand. Now let's style the title. Select it, and apply the heading font variable to the heading 3 element class. And there we go. And if we check, all the dynamic data is still working perfectly here too. So the template updates automatically based on the actual blog post content. Nice. For the post content, Mosaic has a dedicated post content element you can drag in from the Add panel. And the nice thing is, it's fully stylable too. Now, if you want to change how Gutenberg content looks globally, there's a special place for that. First, let's save the template so far. Then, from the Mosaic menu, open the Gutenberg Style Guide. Once you enter the post content scope, you'll see pretty much all the Gutenberg elements laid out here: images, quotes, lists, headings, the whole gang. And this is great, because instead of styling posts one by one, you can style the elements once, and every post updates automatically. For example, I'll select this image and give it a border radius. Instantly feels more aesthetic. Okay, save the changes, then head back to the post template. And there it is. The image inside the post content now has rounded corners automatically. So yeah, this is basically how you style Gutenberg content in Mosaic. Before we wrap this up, don't forget to add the CTA block at the bottom of the page. Always gotta leave people somewhere to click. Let's hit update. And just like that, the post template is done. We're getting close now, only 3 templates left. Let's continue with the contact page. First, I'll swap in another block from the library. Just something a little more fitting for this layout. Now let's style the section a bit. I'll change the background to secondary and update the title's element class while I'm here. Next up, the description. Let's rewrite that real quick. Now for the contact details. I'll update the email addresses and wrap them in links so visitors can actually click them instead of awkwardly copying and pasting them like it's ancient history. The same process for the rest of these items here, so I'll just skip ahead, but feel free to copy the text if you want to. Now let's replace the image. Yep, already looks much better. We don't really need the remaining sections on this page, so I'll remove those to keep things focused. Quickly save the template, and let's jump back to the homepage for a second. And at the bottom here, I actually like this testimonial section quite a bit, and I want to reuse it on the contact page too. So instead of rebuilding it, I'll turn it into a component. Let's call it Testimonial, and save it in the Testimonial category. Save the homepage, and then head back to the contact template. And now, we can just insert the component directly. Select the testimonial block, and there it is. Honestly, this page already feels pretty solid. I'm happy with it for now. Let's save everything and take a quick look through all the views. Yep, everything looks good. Now, head back to the templates, and let's jump into the About Us template. We are not doing a huge redesign here, just cleaning things up a bit and making it fit the rest of the website. First, I'll switch this section background back to our regular background color. Now let's update the title. And while we're here, I'll also add the L subclass. Next up, the description. Just a little less placeholder energy, a little more actual content. Now for the button, I'll update the text and link it to the contact page, because buttons should ideally go somewhere. Let's add an icon too. And you know the drill by now. Open the icon library, grab the usual arrow, reduce its size, and done. We actually don't need this extra text anymore, so I'll remove it. And since the wrapper was only there for that content, I can move the button out of the columns element as well. You can keep this rating here if you want, but I'll remove it this time. Now it feels a bit less busy. And finally, let's update the images. Instead of replacing them one by one, I'll open the component and edit them there directly. And just like that, the About page already feels much more on brand. All right, next up, the Team section. This one mostly needs a cleanup. I'll delete this tiny text here, change the container's layout to 4+4, and delete this paragraph here. Lastly, I'll replace the title and change it to a heading 1. Now let's add one of the owners. I'll replace the image, update their name, title, and description. And instead of this contact link, I'll use an icon. Delete the old text and open the icon library. I'll search for a Facebook icon. And there it is. Now for the social links, I'll duplicate the icon. Then, wrap both of them in a columns so they're easier to manage together. Let's tighten up the spacing a bit using the toolbar here. And swap the second icon for something different. Actually, let's add one more social icon too. You know, just in case they are really social. Now that the first icon group looks good, I'll just copy these social icons over to the second team member. Delete the old contact text, then update the image, the name, position, and the description. There we go. The team officially exists now. Okay, next section. I'll quickly remove this text, swap out the title, remove the paragraph here, then update the class on the title. Set the background to secondary. And lastly, change the image. Awesome. Let's see what's up next. Now these numbers down here, I really don't feel like rebuilding those again. So let's do the smart thing and turn them into a component on the homepage. I'll head back there real quick using the input here. Then find the numbers block. Create a component, give it a name, then save it. Click on Update, and we are good to go. Now back on the About page, I can just insert the component here and delete the old container. Nice. For the testimonials, first, I'll delete this part here. Then let's swap out the image. Replace the lorem ipsum energy with a real testimonial. Update the client details here as well. And suddenly, it feels way less templatey. And finally, the cherry on top, the classic CTA block at the bottom. Because after all this, we need that conversion arc. And we're actually done here. Let's give it a quick save. And before we wrap up, one little bonus template. Let's say you want pages like your privacy policy or terms and conditions to stay simple Gutenberg pages. Good news, you can still fully control how they look in Mosaic. First, head over to the single template. My example privacy policy page is already loaded here, and if you look at the title, you'll notice it's coming from dynamic data. So, whatever page gets loaded here, the title updates automatically. Now honestly, I don't need to redesign much here. I just want to change the visuals a bit. First, let's change the background color of this top section. Then I'll adjust the padding on the post content element to give the text a bit more breathing room. And this part is important. You need to keep a post content element on the page. That's the element responsible for loading the actual Gutenberg content. And actually, I just realized that the logo in the footer is a bit dark. Don't panic. Since this is a component, I can edit the instance. This way the image will be changed only in this position without affecting the logo in the header. So Mosaic handles the layout and styling, while Gutenberg still handles the page content itself. Best of both worlds. So even your boring legal pages stay on brand. And that's it for this one. Not bad for a blank theme, huh? If you made it this far, honestly, respect. And if this video helped, drop a like, subscribe, and join our community using the link below. See you in the next one.